Today, we're going to pop the hood on one of India's biggest states, Madhya Pradesh, and really see how this massive engine of government works. We're going to follow the power, from the very top in the state capital all the way down to the village, to figure out how decisions get made for over 80 million people. I mean, just think about that for a second. How on earth do you manage a population that's bigger than most European countries? How do you make sure laws and services actually reach every single person in a state this huge? Well, that's the puzzle we're going to piece together. All right, here's our game plan. We'll start at the top with the key leaders. Then we'll zoom out to see how power is structured. After that, we dive into how the government shows up in your local community. And finally, we'll look at the modern tools that are supposed to make this whole thing work for you. Okay, first up, the state's top leaders. At the very peak of state government, you've got two main players. But here's where it gets interesting. One has the prestigious title, but the other one holds all the real power. Let's dig in. You know, a great way to think about it is like a big company. The governor, they're kind of like the chairman of the board. They're the constitutional head, the respected, symbolic figure. But the chief minister? Well, the CM is the CEO. They're the one who leads the government, drives the policy, and makes the day-to-day calls. That's where the actual executive power is. And of course, these roles have been filled by some real trailblazers. Take Sarla Grewal, for instance. She became Madhya Pradesh's very first woman governor, which was a huge milestone, breaking new ground in the highest office in the state. And then you get to the other end of the spectrum with this little piece of political trivia. It's just wild. Arjun Singh was the chief minister for a grand total of 1 day. Just one. You can only imagine the political drama behind a term that short. The state's political history is absolutely packed with these record breakers. You've got incredible stories of longevity, like Shivraj Singh Chauhan as the longest-serving CM, but you also have these pivotal firsts, people who completely changed the game, like Kailash Joshi, the first non-Congress CM, or Uma Bharati, the first woman to actually become the state's chief executive. So we've met the leaders. But what kind of system do they actually operate in? Well, any modern government is really built on this idea of separating powers. And Madhya Pradesh is a classic example of that, splitting its administration into 3 core parts. This right here, this is the basic blueprint for how the state runs. It's all designed for checks and balances. You have the legislature, which makes the laws, the executive, which puts those laws into action, and the judiciary, which is like the referee, making sure everything follows the rules. The whole point is that no single branch gets to have all the power. So the power to make laws, that's all in the Vidhan Sabha. It's made up of 230 members who represent the people. Now, the key word here is unicameral. All that means is there's only one house. And what that can do is speed things up, right? It can allow laws to get passed faster because they don't have to go through a second chamber for more debate. And who upholds those laws? That's the job of the state judiciary. The High Court is the top court, obviously, but look at this. It has benches in Indore and Gwalior, and that structure is so important. In a state this big, it gives people better access to justice, so they don't have to travel all the way to one city for every major legal issue. Okay, so we've covered the big picture in the state capital, but how does governing actually trickle down to the hundreds of thousands of villages? Well, that's where the Panchayati Raj system comes in. This is government at its most local, literally government at your doorstep. This is how the government basically zooms in. For rural areas, it's this 3-tier system. You start super local with the Gram Panchayat for a village. Then you go up a level to the Janpad Panchayat for a block of villages. And finally, you have the Zila Panchayat for the whole district. Each step up gives local people a real say in what happens around them. And what this table really shows you is how that local government scales. You go from a sarpanch who's looking after a small village community to a Janpad president for a larger block, all the way to a Zilla president who's responsible for a whole district. Of course, the problems and the responsibilities get bigger at each stage, but that core idea of a 5-year elected term, that stays the same. And get this is so crucial. Madhya Pradesh didn't just adopt this system. They were pioneers. It was the very first state in India to actually bring the 73rd Amendment to life by holding elections for this 3-tier system. They basically set the template for grassroots democracy for the rest of the country. 50%. This number represents a massive reform in local government, Madhya Pradesh reserves half, a full 50% of the seats in these local bodies for women. And that isn't just symbolic. It's a real game changer that fundamentally reshapes power at the grassroots level and makes sure women's voices are right there at the center of local decisions. Okay, so we've seen the leaders, the structure, and the local bodies. But how does this whole system actually adapt for the 21st century? How does it get better at serving people? Well, this final piece is all about rights, reforms, and accountability. We hear this phrase, good governance, all the time, right? But what does it really mean? It just boils down to making the system work well. And it really rests on three big ideas. People need to be able to participate, officials have to be accountable, and the whole thing needs to be transparent. Now, this might be one of the most powerful reforms we've talked about. In 2010, again, Madhya Pradesh was the first state to pass the Public Service Guarantee Act. Think about what this means. Getting something like a birth certificate was no longer just something you hoped for. It became your legal right to get it in a set amount of time. That's a massive shift of power, putting it back in the hands of the citizen. So how do you make a right like that real? Well, technology is a huge part of the answer. You've got all these modern tools, and they all have the same goal, making government easier to reach and easier to hold accountable. Whether it's a helpline you can call, local centers for online services, or even a public dashboard to track big projects, it's all about closing that gap between you and the state. So there you have it. We've gone from the governor all the way down to the Gram Panchayat. We've seen the structures, the history, and the new tools trying to make it all more accountable. It's a huge, complex machine, for sure. Which leaves us with one last really important question. In this entire vast system, what is the single most powerful role that a citizen can play?